Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Friends, welcome to the Encounter program. I'm your host, Mark Kimpland, the pastor at the Endwell United Methodist Church. I'm often amazed as to how God puts people in our lives. Sometimes it's on purpose, and sometimes I would imagine it's by accident. And our guest I met probably about a month and a half ago through a mutual friend at Dunkin' Donuts for a cup of coffee. And from that time, I wanted to make sure that I got him to this show to tell his story, because it's an amazing story. And so I'd like to introduce the guest today, Mouhannad Moses, Pastor Moses, as many of you know, and I'd like to welcome you to the Encounter program.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
It's great. I'm glad that we were able to put this together and pull this off, because you have an amazing story. The first time I met you, I had another person who was from Iran with me, Pastor Daniel, and you two had an amazing conversation about life in the Middle East and growing up, and I'd like to cover that. But I also want to share with those that are listening and watching this show, that Pastor Moses is also the author of an intriguing book, and it's entitled God Rises Against ISIS. And it's an amazing book. I just finished it, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about this book. It's a theological depth to it that I found very intriguing. So thanks for taking this time to write the book and to spend some time here.
Thank you.
So let's begin first with your background, your history, where you were born and raised, and what life was like for you way back when, many years ago. So can we start there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was born and raised in Basra, that's South Iraq, and I went to school there. When I was 5, the war started with Iran. That's when I connected with Pastor Daniel. We had a lot of talk about Iraq and Iran, and yes. Unfortunately we had this war for 8 years. But I was raised kind of in that area in Basra. Went to school in Basra, went to middle school in Basra as well. Spent most of my childhood as well there. I have a lot of memories. I still go once in a while there just to hang out with friends, just to check on neighbors, just to, it's good to feel back home once in a while. Yeah. But that's where basically I was raised. That's where basically I was kind of spent most of my childhood and teenage years.
Now, could you go a little deeper with that? Were they good memories? Were they difficult memories? I get glimpses of both in the book.
Yes.
That they were fond memories, but also challenging memories in the midst of all the political upheaval and all of that. Can you share a little bit of that?
Yeah, unfortunately, there were a lot of, I may say, bad memories. We had, when I was 5, as I said, we went to war with Iran. And then when I was 12, we went with war actually with the rest of the world. When Saddam Hussein, back in those days, 1990, decided to invade Kuwait. And 7 months later, we had the Allied forces led by the United States of America coming against the army of Iraq. They actually pulled them out of Kuwait, and after that, we had the economical sanctions, which were penalized by the Security Council. And that really put Iraq in a very bad position economically. We were not able to sell oil, which was the main resource of livelihood to the Iraqi people, and the prices went up. There was less money coming in as for people who are working, yet more money coming out basically to just cover the necessities of life. So I was kind of in that era, 5 years old, into war with Iran. When I was 12, we went with war with the rest of the world till 2003, when George W. Bush came in and he removed Saddam regime. That was really just the time when Saddam was removed, and things kind of started getting not necessarily better, but there's some hope that we will one day have the freedom and the democracy and the ability basically to express ourselves and to live like anybody else in this world.
So what was life like then for you from that age 5 to 12 during that time?
Very interesting.
before-
We had to move several times. I was in the elementary school, and I remember we went to one of the provinces that was, because the problem was with us, I think that when Basra was very close to Iran. So Iran, every time they shoot some missiles, actually they hit Basra. If you leave Basra, you will be further away from the target of their missiles. So we went into several provinces. We lived outside of Basra several times. We moved a lot just to be out of the range of their missiles. And that, unfortunately, was not good for students because you miss your classes, you change teachers, sometimes you go to different schools and then you come back to the same school. So I would say the education at that time was not that good received because of the war situation and the proximity of Basra to Iran.
Yeah. So what happens after 12 years old, after Saddam is no longer, what happens? What was the progression
that
then?
was, we had just a year or two of peace, like no war, and we were actually, like, the Iraqi people were hoping that things will take off and there will be more prosperity and success, there will be schooling and working and all kind of things. But unfortunately, when we invaded Kuwait, that brought war back again, actually. And we were still teenagers. I mean, it was like, hey, just give me a break here. I just want to live my life. But unfortunately, that brought the American forces and the British forces, and that actually made our relationship with the rest of the Middle East very tricky because most of our neighbors, the Gulf countries, had bad sentiment about us because we invaded one of their very close countries and friends. And unfortunately, yeah, that kind of brought this kind of, I would say, misery to the Iraqi people, including myself. We had to work hard. My dad, I remember, and my mom, they had to work really harder to just keep food on the table and send their kids to school. And that was a very difficult time, I believe, for me, for my parents, for our neighbors, and for the rest of the people. There was really this kind of like, I believe some people even starved. There was it was definitely difficult time. So, but that's where really my childhood and my teenage years kind of took a place. But it's still, there's family, there's a lot of emotion watching my dad working hard just to keep. That was really great and always, make me feel grateful to him and to my mom.
To the sacrifices.
And people were, to the sacrifices, and people trying to help other people, neighbors trying to help other neighbors as well.
Now, you mentioned in your book also, I just want to kind of follow a timeline here. It's kind of my personality with your involvement with the Iraqi army and such, and you mentioned that. Can you say a little bit about that? Because now you're beyond your teenage years or towards the tail end of them, and then you're enlisted to the army.
In Iraq back then, when Saddam was still in power, that if you finish school, if you finish college, you will go only for 18 months. That's mandatory service in the Iraqi army. If you don't, you have to go for 3 years. So because I finished school, I went for only 18 months with the Iraqi army. Fortunately, at that time, we were not in war. We were not in any problem with it. So really it was 18 months of peace, except for the training I had received and for the other specialties I had received. It is difficult really to be, probably any Iraqi person hears me right now, they will tell that it's very difficult to be in the Iraqi army. It's very strict, it's very, it's just way too different. And their mission is to really make you feel as bad as possible.
And they did well
Just kind
at
of to tough you up, but really they really break your humanity from within. So that was about 18 months of trying just to get in and get out. As safe as possible, as sound as possible.
So you did get out. What happens next?
Well, I got 2 jobs. I went and worked with there's a company, Japan Airlines. I worked with that, and then I worked as translator at one of the stores and offices that was providing translation and copy machine and kind of this kind of job. So that was really after I finished my service with the Iraqi Army. And that kind of took me to 2003 when all of a sudden George W. Bush decided he's coming in and he's going to take Saddam out of the picture. And that kind of really kind of threw everything into chaos.
Yes.
Because there was, even though Saddam was a bad guy, and he is a bad guy, and it was good that he was removed, but life was kind of predictable.
Yes.
Like things are in order. Like
Yes.
things, I know what is going on, I know what happened and where I was going. Actually, in 2003, when George W. Bush came in, everything was thrown into chaos. Like now it's completely new life.
Yes, yes.
So we're grateful to the idea of bringing democracy and bringing freedom and the ability for any citizen to express their views and opinions, but at the same time that will not be done without a price. And I think we're still paying for the price.
Okay.
I'm fortunate to be in the U.S. today, but
Yes.
my family, my friends, my neighbors are still in Iraq, and they are struggling really to comprehend this idea of democracy and really be able to have parliament and government and prime minister and president that really abide by the rules and by the Constitution and do whatever it takes to make their country better.
Yes, yeah. Now, how did you make your way to the United States?
Well, that's definitely an interesting story.
Yeah.
My wife and I got married in 2004, and my wife and I were both Christians, but we're from Muslim background. And for a Muslim to become a Christian is a very difficult thing in Middle East. It's still, unfortunately, still in Middle East, that's the case. For us, it's a matter of freedom. We decided to be the way that we want to be. For other people, this is kind of betrayal to the culture, betrayal to the tradition, to the people, to the religion. My wife and I, in 2005, we started feeling this call from God to move, to go to seminary, to study theology and Bible, and to become, for me personally, it was more like to become a pastor.
Okay.
And I was thinking about it very seriously, and I know the decision going to be very difficult. But in 2005, in October, we had this invitation from the Christian and Missionary Alliance Institute of Theology in Beirut, Lebanon. They welcomed us to come and apply. So we applied for scholarship and we applied for a visa, and God responded and gave us both. So went to Lebanon in 2005 in October, and we stayed 3 years. We had all the studies that were necessary for us to equip us to know our Bible, to know our theology, and to know how to serve God and people. In 2008, we finished the school, and we moved to, we were asked by Syria, pastor in Syria Christian Mission Alliance, to come and pastor a church. We went in and we stayed for about 9 months.
Okay.
Now that went great, really, and we loved it. I mean, Syria is a beautiful country, Lebanon as well, it's a paradise. But what happened is in Syria that because we're still in our IDs, Muslims, in our paperwork and our licenses, and we're Christians, and I'm a pastor, I have a church, I'm responsible with a lot of people, but still in my ID, I was still a Muslim. So they caught that.
Okay.
And they start asking questions and asking questions and asking questions for about a couple of days. Every time, sometimes 5 hours of kind of interrogation. I mean, they did not beat me. They did not put me in jail. They did not. A couple of harassment came in, but I kind of went through them, and I was able to stop the person who was doing it. But they were highly respectful. But at the end, they said, "You got to go.
Okay.
We're going to cancel your visa."
Okay.
And you don't have a place to go. I called my brother in Iraq and I said, what are my options? He said, don't come. Lebanon was trying to get us a visa to go to a class at that time, but they said, no, we couldn't get your visa. You got turned down.
Okay.
And I had no other choice.
Sure,
and so I went to my pastor, Edward Awabdi was a very great pastor still in the Middle East. He said, go to the United Nations and talk to them, tell them your story. So I went. And then they said, we promise you we'll call you soon. I went home, and a week later they called me. And I went for another interview, and then I went for another interview. And after 3 interviews within about 2 months period, they said, you know what, we will send you to the U.S. The U.S. wants you to come. And I said, great. And in about 5 months, I was in the U.S. That was kind of in January. By May, I landed in the U.S. That was the fastest process of immigration anybody heard of. Nobody ever had a visa in 5 months in terms of going as a refugee.
That's amazing.
So that's kind of the story of.
Friends, we're blessed to have a guest, Pastor Moses, with us and telling us a little bit about his background as we move towards what you're doing today and all the wonderful work you're doing today and such. So where's your faith in all of this? You've taken us through a wonderful journey and such things. Where does Christ fit into this? Where does the Christian faith fit into that timeline? Or can you shed some light on that?
Well, definitely. I believe that, growing up in Iraq and seeing all this kind of things, basically, I say evil. Unfortunately, the war with Iran was definitely evil. That should not, have happened. The penalties, the invading Kuwait. I have seen all these kind of evil events and things that are happening and unfortunately affecting every single person in the world. And affecting directly, which the things that happened to Iraq affected directly children. I was a child when we went to Iran. That affected me directly and personally. It really affected my life, the way that I was growing up, the way that I was shaped, the way that I was formed. Going to Kuwait was a very bad decision on Saddam's part, and we paid with it for everything we had. So I believe that kind of brought me to this reality that life is really getting controlled, unfortunately, by evil entity present. And that was not just in Iraq, that was in Hitler as well, and a lot of other Mao and all these dictators and people who consider themselves to be above the law or consider themselves to be like gods who have the ability to kill and to raise, like Pharaoh when he spoke to Moses. And Islam, I would say, with all due respect, did not give me the grounds, did not give me the reasoning that I needed to cope with that. So I went more toward atheistic views. I read Western philosophy. I read a lot about other ideas and views that were expressed from atheistic background. And I found a lot of them are close to be correct, but yet empty. Because they don't tell you what to do. They tell you, this is what it is. You got to live with it. After that, I had the opportunity when I was looking for some kind of books and things to stumble on the book on the Gospel of Jesus Christ. I was completely stunned by this because it's like a small book called the Book of Life, and I hold it in my hand. And I was like, what, the Book of Life? Who would name a book of life? Yes. And then the guy who was selling the book said, hey, have you ever been to a church? I said, nope. He said, do you want to buy this? I said, I'll buy it. No worries. So I bought the gospel. I went home, I started reading it. It's like the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the gospel of Matthew. So I was like, interesting. That's the gospel of Christians. I went to church with that man who was great. I'm grateful to him. And I was exposed for the first time to the gospel of Jesus Christ. The pastor made it very clear. God became man, came all the way from heaven to earth to live like just anyone, like any one of us, and to go to the cross and get killed for our sins and our righteousness. And if you have put your faith in him, you will become his child, not from flesh and blood, but by the will of God. And I was stunned because he was not just saying that God exists and he's somehow sitting somewhere else, but he said God not just exists, but he came to become like you, to live like you, to suffer like you, to be in pain like you. And I was in a lot of pain growing up in Iraq. And I said, wow, this is the God who pains with me. This is the God who was hurting with me. And I just couldn't believe the story. I said, like, I am in. If this is true, though,